Welcome to another edition of the Legacy Warriors podcast, where we cover the top two feeder leagues to the UFC, whether it is the LFA or this week we're covering Cage Warriors, as they have Cage Warriors 188 going down in Dublin, Ireland, and obviously they got a ton of Irish talent sprinkled out throughout the card. And headlining this whole card is actually two title fights. We're in the light heavyweight division in the co-main event. We got James Webb looking to defend his title after his victory over Andy Clamp to claim it. He's going up against former UFC fighter John Allen. And then in the main event, we got James Sheehan looking to defend his Cage Warriors gold as he takes on Justin Burlinson in a matchup that is currently lined at a pick'em. So it should be interesting to see how that fight shakes out. And I'm looking forward to breaking that down for you guys later on in this podcast. There's 16 fights sprinkled out throughout this entire card, so a ton to dig into. There's a ton of chalk, unfortunately, so I don't think there are many betting opportunities that we can really take advantage of, but there are some underdog spots and other spots that I wouldn't mind parlaying, so hopefully you guys can figure it out through the breakdowns that I do for you guys here, or you guys can check out the MMA, LOT, and Patreon page where I have tracked plays for this card already posted, and you guys can just tail that if you want, or just take whatever information you can from this podcast and go about it yourself. There's also KSW and OKTAGON going down at the same time as Cage Warriors. So if you want to get in on that stuff, I only have them in written form, broken down on the MMA, LOT, and Patreon page. Track plays for those bad boys as well. So hop on there if that's what you want to do. It's a perfect appetizer for the UFC Kansas City card, which goes down later on Saturday. All right. Without further ado, let's get right into this Cage Warriors breakdown. I believe it's about 12 hours until the fights kick off from the moment that I've recorded this, so I'm going to get this out for you guys sooner than later and be a little bit brief with some of these breakdowns. All right, so let's get right to it. First matchup up, we got Jamie Abbott-Bissett coming in at minus 350, going up against Charlie Falco. Bissett made his pro debut last time around and showcased very slick BJJ early, and that ultimately seemed to gas his opponent out, and that led to Bissett getting that second round TKO. He's taken on a can crusher in Falco, who has 6 pro wins over guys with a combined record of 2-8, and when he faces anybody with legitimate resistance, we see him start to fold and take a little bit too much damage, and that's exactly what I expect Abbott-Bissett to do. I'm not too hot on his chalky price tag here, considering how young he still is, and not to mention he went 8-10 as an amateur himself, but I think we'll see a better version of him here. I think we'll see him utilize his grappling effectively, and that should eventually lead to him getting a first or second round submission. Next up, we got Matthew Elliott coming in at minus 160, going up against Kenny Mokhonoana, who comes in at plus 130. Now, Elliott's riding a 2-fight winning streak, showcasing how physical of a grappler he is by taking opponents down and submitting both of those guys in the second round of their fights. His striking still needs a little bit of work as he looks kind of uncomfortable there, but once he's able to get a hold of his opponents, it's not often they're able to get away from him, and he usually has a good enough gas tank to go 15 minutes if he needs to. He's going up against Kenny Mokhonoana, who went 2-2 under their PFL Bellator banner, and now he's actually 0-2 in his last 2 fights, being grinded out by superior grapplers. It was Ibragimov, and Josh O'Connor who were able to keep him on the defensive, and that's where we see the flaws in Mokhonoana's game, which has kept him from getting back to his winning ways. Unfortunately for Mokhonoana, he's facing another guy that can continuously put him in those bad positions, and I expect Elliott to do so. The only reason I don't have even more confidence is the lack of striking game from Elliott. If he can't get Mokhonoana to the ground or actually keep him on the defensive, he could get pieced up on the feet, which would lead to Mokhonoana snapping this losing streak. I'm still going to go with Elliott here, as I believe in his grappling enough to muzzle the game of Mokhonoana. Next up, Kieran Brady coming in at minus 800, going up against Giovanni Fernandez, who comes in at plus 550. Dating back to the amateur days for Brady, he currently rides a 9-fight winning streak and finishing his last 4 wins by submissions. He does a great job in terms of taking opponents to the ground and transitioning to dominant positions, and then eventually from there finding submissions or ways to break his opponent. Fernandez made his Cage Warriors debut last November as he came in against a minus 1,200 favorite and ended up pulling off the upset after getting 10-8'd for the first 4 minutes of that fight. It seemed like his opponent blew his gas tank trying to finish Fernandez, and eventually Fernandez was able to take over in round 2 and get a submission victory of his own. He's still very young, but he's very gritty and durable, and I think that Brady will have seen that from his last fight, and that will allow Brady to be a little bit more disciplined and composed with his offensive approach, and I think that will eventually lead to him getting that finish. But minus 800 is kind of the limit of what I would pay here. Don't let Fernandez's upset victory sway you too much in the kid's favor. Brady is still the better fighter, and I think he'll show in spades. Next up, we got Scott Harvey coming in at plus 100, going up against Leon Arms, who comes in at minus 120. Last time around for Harvey, he was able to make it a 4-0 pro record as he outdamaged his opponent and utilized his grappling defensively so he can utilize his striking advantage to get that victory. Normally, Harvey is the guy that's looking to implement his wrestling to overwhelm his opponents and drown them on the mat. With Arms, he's more of a striker who does a great job in terms of mixing up his attacks from the head to the body to the legs. He's very good in terms of continuously throwing combinations and switching up his targets. His defensive grappling is still a big question mark for me, as the guys that he's been facing are guys that don't have good enough grappling to really see where he's at. Luckily for Arms and his ability to prove people wrong, this weekend will be the chance for him to do so, as Harvey has a good enough grappling game to take advantage of that if he can. I think that Harvey can mix up his striking well enough here to remain safe enough until he can continuously change levels or push Arms against the cage and land some damage there to slowly eke this fight out. To get Harvey as the slight underdog here, I think is worth a shot considering how competitive both these guys are. I just think Harvey is a little bit more well-rounded. Next up, we got Alexander O'Sullivan coming in at minus 2,000, going up against Toman, who comes in at plus 1,000. It's been over 2 years since we've seen O'Sullivan in action, but he has a 2-0 pro record, with both of those wins coming by first-round armbar. He went 20-10 as an amateur, but switching over to the pro scene, he hasn't been all that active. He likes that jiu-jitsu game and doesn't mind being taken down because he believes in his jiu-jitsu that much. Toman will surely be looking to take him down considering the physical and wrestling nature that he brings to the table, and I think that we'll see him try to land those takedowns and get some good top time, maybe even look to utilize it defensively so he can start throwing some power at O'Sullivan. I don't really get the minus 2,000 number here, and I wouldn't be against anybody looking to take a 0.1 unit shot on Toman at plus 10,000, or sorry, at plus 1,000, I should say. But I still expect O'Sullivan to eventually get that jiu-jitsu game going, find that submission, and force the tap, but minus 2,000 is just wild to me. Speaking of more wild numbers, we got Darcy coming in at minus 1,600, going up against Daniela Sanches, who comes in at plus 900. Darcy improved to 2-0 as a pro last time around, as she TKO'd her opponent just as she did in her pro debut in the first round. It's clear those were very low-level opponents, so we got to take that with a grain of salt. She's clearly a slugger and wants to walk her opponents down and throw a ton of volume and combinations to try to eventually finish her opponents. Her opponent this weekend, Daniela Sanches, is a BJJ brown belt who lost her pro debut, then took 3 years away from action and returned to get a round 1 submission victory. Her striking looks very low level, so it's clear that she needs to try to get fights to the ground here. We still don't know the level of Darcy's defensive grappling game, so that's why at minus 1,600, I'm kind of scratching my head. With that said, I still believe Darcy is just more physical than Sanches, and that will allow her to keep this fight upright and really take advantage of the very lacking game of Daniela Sanches. Look for Darcy to walk Sanches down and overwhelm her with a barrage of shots and get her out of there within 1.5 rounds. Next up, we got Conor McCarthy coming in at minus 1,200, going up against Joshua Onwardi, who comes in at plus 750. I'm excited to see McCarthy back in action as I'm very, very high on him. He went 11-2 as an amateur, and now he's 3-0 as a pro, showcasing very slick striking with great footwork, in and out movement, and speed. He's also shown off some very good physicality in terms of eating some time off the clock while clinching opponents up against the cage and landing some dirty boxing and dirty, or at least knees up the middle as well. His opponent Onwardi will be looking to get in close quarters with McCarthy, considering the grapple-heavy approach he normally brings to the table. He has a very salty record, but he's physical and he's strong, but he's very lackluster in the striking realm, and I think McCarthy is good enough in terms of keeping this fight upright, stopping the grappling of Onwardi, and making him pay on the feet, eventually leading to a second or third round KO for McCarthy. Next up, we got Chasen Blair coming in at minus 650, going up against Diego Visanzay, who comes in at plus 475. Now, Blair, obviously, last time around, we saw him on the Contender series, where he came in as a short notice replacement to take on a very tough Cody Steele. He was coming off a win just about 2.5 weeks prior to that, but it was obvious that Steele was just a little bit too good for him. Blair was unable to get to his wrestling game, which we normally see, and that ultimately allowed Steele to just throw down on the feet, eventually finishing Blair in the second round. Blair normally likes to rely on that grappling, but also has some big punching power if he can get comfortable in that space. Luckily for him, he's going up against a can crusher from Spain who has wins over opponents with a combined record of 9-30-1. And if you take one of those opponents out, that drops to 2-7. He likes to strike, has very poor takedown defense, and this really looks like a layup for Blair to get back on track, and especially if he goes to his wrestling, he can dominate this fight and get the win within the first round. I'm very surprised this line is only at minus 650, as I think Blair runs through Visanzay, so I'll definitely be looking to parlay Blair somewhere else on this card. All right, next up, we got Keogh coming in at minus 1200, going up against Joe Doyle, who comes in at plus 750. I believe this is a showcase spot for Keogh, who had a very solid amateur run where he went 15-0, finishing his amateur career back in late 2023. He made his pro debut back in May and absolutely walked through his opponent, finishing him very quickly. Slick striker, impressive grappling game. I'd just like to see a little bit more urgency with him working back to his feet, but he is still quite aggressive off of his back if he finds himself there, and I think we're seeing him given a layup spot here against a guy in Joe Doyle, who went 3-3 as an amateur and makes his pro debut on this card. I think we see Keogh quickly finish him, probably within a round and a half, and I think that comes by submission. All right, next up, we got Darby coming in at minus 470, going up against Toman Langowski, who comes in at plus 370. It's been over a year and a half since we've seen Darby in action. He's had a few fights lined up since then, but obviously a couple different reasons as to why those fights fell through. He's a long, lanky welterweight that utilizes that long frame for a submission game, which is why his last win was by a standing guillotine. He's often fighting from a defensive standpoint, but it's quite often that he ends up finding that submission opportunity that he ends up coming out on top with. His opponent, Langowski, is 1-3 in his last 4 fights, and his last 5 fights have all finished in the first round. He's a power puncher, but is very weak on the mat, hence why 3 of his 5 losses have come by submission. And I think that Darby will be able to find that submission in this spot. Minus 470, I don't completely mind. His only professional loss came when he got rushed on the feet by Mush Aslani, and that fight only lasted about 20 seconds. And obviously Langowski is a big power puncher as well, but I'm hoping that Darby can learn from that Aslani loss and get this fight to the ground sooner than later and really start to work Langowski over and eventually find that submission under 1.5 rounds. All right, next up, we got Simon coming in at minus 700, going up against Christian Iorga, who comes in at plus 500. Now, Simon is a very solid fighter who actually only went 10-8 as an amateur fighter, but now finds himself at 5-0 as a pro. He's finished all 5 of those wins, with 3 of the last 3 coming by submission, showcasing the big grappling improvements that he needed to make in his amateur days. His striking is very sharp, quick, and effective, but again, it's his grappling that has very much impressed me as of late. His opponent, Iorga, came straight into the Cage Warriors promotion last time around and got a title shot against George Hardwick, and that went as most would have expected it to go, with Hardwick picking him apart and shutting down Iorga's grappling game. Iorga is thick and physical and normally looks to take his opponents to the ground sooner than later, but I think Simon will slowly work him down, touching him up on the feet, shutting down the grappling, and then eventually finishing him over that 1.5 round mark, but under 2.5 rounds. All right, next up, Maximus Lally coming in at minus 260, going up against Alexis Tsarmanditis, who comes in at plus 220. I do like me some Lally in this spot, as I think that he's very talented. I would just like to see his grappling game continue to improve. He's very slick on the feet, often looking to finish his opponents pretty quickly, and all 3 of his pro wins are by round 1 knockout. He also went 9-0 as an amateur and looks to be a very highly touted prospect. He's going up against a tough Tsarmanditis, who is a Greek prospect that trains out of the All-Stars gym over there in Sweden. 4-1 as a pro, with 3 of those wins coming inside the distance. His lone defeat was when he got absolutely dominated by another highly touted prospect for a different promotion, and then eventually finished in the second round. I feel Lally will be too sharp on the feet, and that could eventually lead to Lally getting a knockout in the second or third round. My only holdup is if Tsarmanditis' strength and athleticism allows him to get this fight into the grappling realm and get that control off. But I think Lally's grappling off his back is good enough that he can keep Tsarmanditis working, and that will eventually lead to Lally finding that finish within 2.5 rounds. All right, next up, we got Jur Harris coming in at minus 175, going up against Marcus Vinicius Ferreira, who comes in at plus 140. Now, Harris had his 3-fight winning streak snapped last time around by split decision against Giovanni Scott in a very back-and-forth grapple fest. Both guys were hitting reversals and submission attempts, and ultimately it was Scott who was able to get more damage off during those exchanges, which is why he ended up winning the fight. Harris's striking is not too shabby, but it's usually his pressure grappling that allows him to grind opponents out and eventually win fights on the scorecards. He's going up against Ferreira here, who's making his Cage Warriors debut, and he looks good. You know, he's a BJJ black belt who's riding a 5-fight winning streak and brings a very aggressive style to the cage. He loves to apply pressure with his striking and then changing levels and getting things to the mat, where he's shown very good control and top pressure. This is a very tough fight to call. You know, I think Harris ultimately will get the nod for me here, as I think that he'll have slightly better wrestling. But if he doesn't show the urgency to work out of some bad spots that Ferreira will surely put him into, this could be much closer than minus 175 indicates. I'd actually put Harris closer to about minus 120, minus 125. So you can say that there's maybe a little bit of value here on Ferreira. But I think this fight ultimately hits the scorecards. It'll look close to that Giovanni Scott fight, but I think that will see Harris make the improvements needed to end up getting his hand raised. But I would definitely keep my eye on Ferreira. This guy looks very intriguing, very aggressive, and definitely loves to throw down, and that might be enough for him to actually get the win here. So close fight, but I'm going to go with Harris as I lean with his wrestling improvements, or at least his wrestling advantage in this matchup. Our next up, we got Paddy McCorry coming in at minus 1,200, going up against Ghassan Abdenabi. Squash match here. This seems like a spot where McCorry can touch up Abdenabi from distance and eventually find that submission. Abdenabi is a Dutch kickboxer, but really not all that good. We saw Andy Clamp quickly finish him in his July 2023 Cage Warriors fight. And I think that we'll see McCorry do the same here. And, I wouldn't be surprised if that chalky minus 180 under 1.5 ends up coming through. All right, next up, we got the first of 2 title fights here, as we have the light heavyweight champion James Webb coming in at minus 130, going up against John Allen, who comes in at plus 110. Now, Webb was the former middleweight champion, didn't get to defend it or anything, but he did win the title back in the day. And then he did get an opportunity to fight for it once again, but came up short. And now he's been up at light heavyweight. He won the title, I believe, in his last matchup, where he was able to get the 3rd round submission victory over, I believe it was Andy Clamp that he defeated. Very good fight for him there. where he was able to, there was a lot of grappling, a lot of reversals. It was very grueling. It was clear both guys were slowing down, but ultimately James Webb was able to get the finish there by TKO. But he's 35 years old. I'd be very surprised if the UFC ends up getting him any type of shot, even if he wins this matchup here. But usually he brings a grueling grappling approach to a lot of his fights to either grind opponents out or end up looking for submissions to get the win. His opponent, John Allen, is a former UFC fighter who went 0-2 and won no contest through his 3 fights, although that no contest was a win that was overturned after a failed drug test. He's primarily a striker with decent takedown defense, and I think that this is a fight, especially in a 5-rounder, that Allen might be able to survive the first 2 rounds of the constant grappling and pressure of Webb, and as Webb starts to slow down, I think we'll see Allen's striking advantage really start to pick Webb apart and eventually lead to that finish. The over 1.5, roughly around -150, is very intriguing, as I think that this will be a little bit of a grind through the first 7.5 to 10 minutes. But as Webb starts to slow down, look for Allen to start taking over and eventually find that finish, earning him the Cage Warriors light heavyweight title. And in the main event, we got the Cage Warriors welterweight title on the line as James Sheehan looks to defend his title for the first time after winning it last year. He was able to end up submitting BJJ black belt Daniel Conrad, and now he looks to defend it against Justin Burlinson, and this fight is currently at a pick'em, and for good reason. Both guys normally like to showcase a very, very solid striking style, trying to maintain their distance and utilize their range and reach to keep opponents at bay. Both guys have also shown off tremendous grappling improvements, but I think it's Burlinson who showcased a slightly better game overall. I think he'll be able to really put it on Sheehan here with the striking and then eventually get this fight into the grappling realm where he can get more control. And I think he may even be able to get a late stoppage here. But I think that this fight probably hits the championship rounds, and I think it'll ultimately be Burlinson landing more damage and then eventually asserting his dominance with his grappling and either getting a 4th or 5th round stoppage, or he probably wins on the scorecards. But regardless, I think we get and new Cage Warriors welterweight champion Justin Burlinson. All right, that's a wrap on the Cage Warriors 188 full card breakdown. I got all my track plays on the Patreon page. Not to mention, we're also doing KSW and OKTAGON, which will be going down at the same time as Cage Warriors. And I'll have written breakdowns for that on the Lock of the Night Patreon page, as well as track plays for those cards as well, leading up to the UFC Kansas City card to finish off an action-packed Saturday of fights. All right. Good luck on all your action this weekend, folks, and I'll see you guys again on Sunday or Monday to break down the UFC Des Moines card. See you guys then. Peace.